Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Truth Shots with Kapil, the de-addiction series. I'm extremely proud today to have with me Miss Deepa Kannan. She's a famous author, and she's going to talk about, her career and her life in just a little bit. But she's somebody that has authored a book called as How to Sleep Better, and she's a fabulous person. We will talk more about the book. We will talk more about de-addiction, which is what we are talking about in this series. But before we do any of that, Deepa, if you can please introduce yourself for our audience.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Kapil. And my journey started 25 years ago with teaching yoga. So I've also lived in the ashram, including ashram in the Himalayas. So I was teaching yoga when yoga was not as cool as it is today, for sure. And people used to look at me like I was wasting my life. And along the way, went through a divorce, and then I got remarried. My child was born with a rare adrenal disorder. In trying to figure out his diagnosis and understanding how to cope with having a child who needed to be steroid dependent his entire life, and of course, to help him not be hospitalized as much, I started going into the world of nutrition. And to be honest, couple doctors still tell even parents today that food doesn't play a role in diagnosed diseases, and to some extent certain conditions are that way, but food plays a role in just about everything. We can do so much. It absolutely supports the physiology, therefore the psychology. And so I got into the world of nutrition and then discovered the world of what is called functional medicine, where doctors were looking at the body as how every system is interconnected versus looking at one system in isolation. And while getting into this world, it was fascinating world for sure, and there's a lot of emphasis on sleep. But people were saying sleep is important, but nobody was really diving into how to look at sleep as how uniquely personalized it is to every single individual. And that was one problem. So it wasn't as important. Sometimes it's not enough to just switch off your phone and have a scheduled time, or clean up the bedroom, have a temperature. Those are great, but they don't work for everybody. So I really wanted to honor the individual, which is why I started to look at sleep in a deeper way. And then I also found there was at times Western science places too much emphasis on research. And I started to think how 25 years ago, when I started teaching yoga, there wasn't a single research on the benefits of meditation or yoga. And today there's being so much research done into these practices from ancient wisdom. And it's good that research is bringing it to the forefront, but there's still, it's going to be many, many years away before it catches up. So therefore, I felt yoga and Ayurveda were these sister sciences, and I definitely needed to complete that journey with Ayurveda, which is why I came back that full circle. And I felt I needed to bring the attention back to India. And truly, if you ask me, my intention is to make the knowledge of India a source of pride, and looking beyond what is being researched, taking those nuances, which there's such rich wisdom here, and marrying it to a science approach, because we also don't want to dishonor somebody by saying ignore the lab markers or these don't matter. So how can you take the best of all these worlds and honor the individual as is the best way possible for that person? And of course, that's what I've done in the book, How to Sleep Better. And if you've read the book, I hope I've done that good job of bringing these two worlds together. But that's just a quick overview about me. And I think we should probably save our time to talk about this important topic of de addiction.
Right. So let me just jump right into it. Can you talk about how does functional medicine as well as Ayurveda would play a role when you're talking about the psychological symptoms of addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to say, Kapil, right off is that both functional medicine and Ayurveda don't look at anything as a label of a condition or a symptom, but as the unique individual. So, the very same addictive patterns can be a result of a different set of permutation and combination of root causes based upon two different individuals. So I think it's very important that somebody is assessed either by an Ayurvedic Vaidya or somebody who can go into what is the imbalance in this particular person. Now, that said, we can absolutely talk about the overarching view or the umbrella lens of this from these two perspectives. That you know that we do talk a lot about sleep and the importance of sleep. So, how can we bring sleep as a way to understand addiction? So, may I please just introduce a little bit about the doshas, because obviously I don't know how many listeners may know all about Ayurveda. So there is a concept in Ayurveda of Tridosha, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And Vata is an element of air and space. It's responsible for everything that is movement in the body. So food that moves through the digestive tract, the movement of electric energy via the nervous system, the flow of blood. So everything that's movement is Vata. Pitta is fire and water. All that is transformation is Pitta. So it is responsible for converting food to energy, for converting food to energy, and then thereby into different tissues or hormones, anything that requires something which requires that heat to transform is Pitta. Kapha is earth and water, and anything that is stability and structure is Kapha. So, building our muscles, our skeletal system, our tissues, our bone, everything that is stable in the body is Kapha. This just gives a little understanding which we can then use to go into the imbalances. When we look at sleep challenges, or when we look at what is a tendency towards addiction from the context of Ayurveda, there is always certain things involved. First is there's usually an imbalance in Vata. Now, let us say when we say Vata imbalance, what does that mean? It means that we've got a tendency for the whole body to be in a state of cold dryness, which means we can be prone to constipation. Our nervous system will be likely to tip over into a fight or flight, very overactive. It cannot calm down. So, what we say sympathetic fight or flight, high adrenaline, is what Ayurveda says is high vata. The second thing from Ayurveda, when there's a tendency for addiction, is the concept of the Mahagunas. So there is a spectrum or a continuum: Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Sattva is equilibrium, Rajas is restlessness, Tamas is lethargy or dull, darkness, sort of a dull state of mind. Now, the ancient believe that you can only go from this dull state tamas to rajas. So you use activity, then you reach a state of rajas, which in excess can be restlessness. The mind can't shut down. From there, we can go towards sattva, which is equilibrium. Now, tamas is another reason for tendency towards addiction. So we've got high vata, we've got a tamas. So we've got this, when we look at these imbalances which tip or cause a tendency to addiction, it's high vata, it's tamas, and then there's something called ama, which is weak digestion that leads to the formation of toxins in the body. So that's an Ayurvedic perspective. Now, if we look from a functional medicine perspective, we know a lot about dopamine. And we know that dopamine plays a very key role in addictive behavior, be it our addiction towards social media or addiction towards any substance. And that over time, if we keep doing the same thing, whether it's eating a lot of sugar or having alcohol or social scrolling, that the brain almost creates these receptor cells which start to then demand the same thing. So it's very difficult for us to battle with that, because there's a physiology going on that's keeping us in that state of addiction. So if you see from a functional perspective, there's a lot that's involved in addictive patterns. There's a gut brain physiology, meaning that if our gut is in a state of imbalance, most of the neurotransmitters, whether it's serotonin, dopamine, GABA, everything that's responsible to keep us stable in mood, keep us motivated for life, keep us in an ability where we can choose, make the right choices. All of that is predominantly done with a healthy gut. So if our gut is not healthy, then we don't have the control to get over addictive patterns. So then there is the gut brain axis for sure. Then, of course, there's this whole aspect of trauma. More and more is spoken about today on trauma, and I really want to emphasize two things when it comes to trauma. That in the UK, there's something now being brought to the forefront called trauma-informed care, where they're going into understanding whether a person was impacted by trauma through their childhood. There can be big trauma and little trauma. Now, everything from abuse to financial difficulty to a child being neglected, all of these are trauma. When we are traumatized through life, through childhood, then something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, is programmed. It's almost as if that computer program has been created where we don't know how to react from a state of the brain that is known as the prefrontal cortex, which is our ability to make a conscious decision. Instead, we're reacting, and all our behavior is coming from a region of the brain known as the amygdala, which is only sort of works when or rather, it should be working in emergency mode. It doesn't allow us to take conscious decisions. So it's coming from reactive tendencies. So when we look at these two perspectives, it's clear that the physiology plays a very big role. So there's this often question asked, Kapil, and I've asked somebody this who's very involved in mental health, that how do you create a diagnosis? How do you decide a person has got, say, anxiety or depression, and do they run tests on low iron, low B12, thyroid health, gut health? And they said that all of this comes much later. Now, that's an injustice to the person, because all of these areas are going to lead to our ability to have this tendency towards addiction. So it is not that we are weak people, it is because the physiology is in a state of imbalance. So I think even if somebody, wherever they are on that addiction, de-addiction journey, that they can do so much for themselves, starting by balancing the physiology, helping them to improve their sleep. So it really, I think we'll have to break this up into stages of that de-addiction journey. But at any point in time, if you were to ask me, how can you use Ayurveda? How can you use functional medicine? You can use Ayurveda by going and staying in Ayurvedic center and doing Panchakarma regularly, because Panchakarma is so powerful in rebalancing the entire body. Plus, you're taking yourself away from your regular situation, and your most Ayurvedic centers are quite serene places, and there's a sense of sattva, that equilibrium all around you. So I think Panchakarma is something which is very important. There's also herbs that are very safe for all of us to utilize. For example, even if you don't see a Vaidya, you can always have something like a Jadamansi tea. So you just take a little bit of the Jadamansi root and boil it into a tea and just sip on it in the evenings, which calm down the nervous system. It allows you to not have that overactivated anxious state, which will then lead to poor choices. So for sure these nervine herbs will be very helpful. We can also keep in mind that in addiction like alcohol, the liver is always going to be affected, and Ayurveda has such wonderful herbs when it comes to taking care of the liver. And I'm for sure not endorsing that go ahead and have the herbs to clean up. I've heard one thing, and why I bring this up, Kapil, is that I have heard people not in addictive patterns, but who've said, what do you do after a night of binge drinking and next day you have this herb? And that's really very confusing to the body. But if you are definitely on that journey and you have that intention to balance the body, for sure there are herbs in Ayurveda where you can help to rejuvenate the liver. No matter how far it's progressed, I think the liver is such a miracle organ. It is the largest organ of detoxification. So both Ayurveda and functional medicine bring a lot of attention to the liver, and the liver can be taken care of. And we can also give herbs like Brahmi, which is again quite safe universally, but Brahmi helps us to change the brain physiology. I've used it very effectively treating clients even with severe symptoms like hallucinations, and we know that addiction can also lead into these sort of symptoms. The pathology can show up as something like high anxiety or hallucinations, or so for sure we can use herbs for sleep, herbs for calming the nervous system, cleaning up the liver, supporting the brain. And if you ask how can functional medicine help, if you ask me one thing functional medicine really emphasizes, it is the concept of how a stable blood sugar balance is required for treating every single symptom and condition. We know that sugar intake and alcohol intake behave very similarly. The moment they go into the stomach, before anything happens, their sugar hits the bloodstream and it creates a severe imbalance in blood sugar. Once more, Kapil, just to clarify, because I do hear people saying, I'm not a diabetic, but that has nothing to do with blood sugar regulation. Each one of us needs blood sugar to be stable, to have stable energy, stable mood. So I think even wherever somebody is on their addiction or that journey towards healing from addiction, that you can begin by seeing if every meal has enough of fiber, protein, and fat, and adding, like, even if you have to add a very clean plant protein shake, it can go such a long way in stabilizing. If your blood sugar is stable, the chances are your cravings are going to drop by 70%. So I think the physiology can matter. So you can create a foundation or a scaffolding before even you start the work of weaning off or tapering something, because that's going to help you on that journey. And there's so much more, but please ask me specifics if I don't want to go too far either.
So one specific aspect that people usually do not understand or kind of struggle with is addiction. While I mean anybody can get addicted, but addiction also has kind of an implication from an individual's physiological behavior. And so there are people that just by the way they are, just by their biology and their chemistry, are going to be more susceptible to addiction versus others. So can you kind of, in your research, or in the work that you have done. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's something that people really struggle with. They almost talk about, hey, I'm doing exactly what my friend is doing, so why am I getting more addicted than the other
For
person?
sure. I think that's a brilliant question, and something that takes away also that frustration that comes from such things. And I think, again, we need to understand the unique body constitution. So, who might be at risk for, or rather have a higher tendency for addiction, and therefore struggle to get off more than others? And so, if we look from an Ayurvedic perspective, there's the concept of Prakriti and Vikriti. So, I have to just explain that very quickly to then come into this. Prakriti means that it is a particular combination of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, doshas, which is created at the time of conception itself, which decides that a person will have a certain tendency for a body structure. For example, Vatas will usually be very skinny, Pittas more medium, Kaphas a little more tendency to be big boned. And this is not exactly black and white, because there are dual Prakritis. You could be Vata, Pitta. But if we were to look at those Prakriti, and the Prakriti never changes the rest of your life. So if the person has a Vata constitution, a Pitta constitution, or a Vata Pitta constitution, they will have a higher chance or a higher tendency towards this addictive behavior. That's because they've got the tendency for the nervous system to go off balance very easily, because they are missing out on the stability of Kapha dosha. So those who have a strong Kapha constitution invariably will not tip so much into these patterns. It's the Vata constitution, Pitta constitution, Vata Pitta. So the Vata Pitta can be the ones who have the tendency towards highest addiction. Now, you also asked me why will they struggle with it. It's because these constitution, there is a saying in Ayurveda that Vata is the easiest dosha to go off balance. It can go off balance for anybody. And when Vata goes off balance, it can push all other doshas off balance. So, what does that mean? It means, if we look at it today, that the person, why is that person with the Vata Prakriti more tendency towards these behavior, is because they are a tendency to be dry. We know that all our cell membranes are made up of fat. We know that our nerves sheaths are made up of fat, because we've now started to understand, even in conditions like multiple sclerosis, that fatty layer starts to break down, and therefore we lose the nerve connection. So if somebody doesn't have enough fat, and why I'm saying this, Kapil, is that for somebody who's a Vata Prakriti, it's extremely dangerous to go into diets like low fat diets, which do not have any fats in the diet. Now, I know there's a lot spoken about today about the whole food plant-based diet. I'm not anti-vegan. I just want to clarify. I think you can be a very healthy vegan with fats. But if you take the fats out, and I've heard recipes, it's spreading really like wildfire, where you saute vegetables and grains in water, you don't consume a single oil. This is extremely, it means you're setting yourself up for addictive patterns, and you're going to not have the physiology to reverse or come out of these. So if you ask me what's the highest, most important thing somebody who's struggling with that, ask yourself, are you or have you been put on a diet which is removing fats? That's where you have to begin. You have to include the, if even if you want to be plant-based, you have to bring in the sesame oil, coconut oil, nuts, seeds, avocado, coconut, all of it. Do not do low fat diets. That's really important. The second is having adequate protein. So most often I've heard even Ayurvedic Vaidyas talking about, I just have ghee and rice and some vegetables. We don't need protein. I heard a very famous one on Instagram talking about, if we get protein once in 2-3 days, it's more than enough. Now, while protein is also going the other way with the carnivore diet and pushing people into extremes, let's not discount that every macronutrient has importance. Nothing is of less importance. We do need the whole grains, we do need the proteins, and we need the fats. So no diet which removes the food group is acceptable to me. I think somebody who's struggling with mental health, addiction, they need to start with stable meals, eating, not worrying about, has this got oil, I shouldn't be having oil. So that's really where you should begin, because the vata and pittas need whole grains. And when I said that these are the constitution that have the greater tendency towards addiction or struggle to get over addiction, there is a saying that we've got these 6 tastes in food, and vatas, pittas both need the madura, which means that if you do this, I've seen this also, Kapil, that there's a lot spoken about grains being inflammatory, that don't eat any grains, you eat only vegetables, raw green smoothies. Now, if you keep doing these sort of things and you take out the good forms of sugar, madura means sweet. We need it from sweet potato, yam, tapioca, rice, wheat, whatever, all the grains, all the sweet vegetables, beetroot, carrot. If we remove all of this, the body and the mind will seek out that sugar in some other way. So I've seen people who don't eat grains all day long, last thing at night they'll reach for a pastry. Why is the body doing that? It's because you're depriving it of some stable tastes. So I think you have to provide these basics, and definitely not low fat diet. And if you ask from a functional perspective, I think it's important that don't deny, see that every meal has ample protein, ample vegetables, fats, all of it, and keep the gut healthy. So don't we can talk so much about gut health that I don't think we'll get to do it by itself today, but we can. I hope that was enough for the question.
That's a very good start for people to start looking at exploring more and come back. And of course, we will help them with more on that. I want to shift gears and talk to you about two specific things. One, a lot of addiction many times is stress related in people's life. So, what can Ayurveda provide people in terms of doing stress management and avoid falling into what are those destructive patterns in their lives?
Okay, great question. Way back in when I was in the Himalayas, and we had this class on Bhagavad Gita, and there was one verse, which described that of inaction in action and action in inaction, which is superior. And I thought a lot about this. What that basically means is that action in inaction, right? So you're sitting still in a meditation pose, but your mind is thinking about, it can't switch off, right? So you're trying to be in meditation. One moment the thought comes, oh, I need to do this at work. Oh, I haven't done that. Oh my God, she hurt me, right? So our mind is busy. On the other hand, we could be sweeping our house and our mind could be very zen. We could be washing our vessels and we could be calm. And that's really what is being spoken about. I was so fascinated that I saw somebody talking about CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And they were talking about mindful practices such as when you're washing vessels, feeling the water on your hands. And I was thinking that they're talking about CBTI as a science-backed practice, but they're bringing in practices from ancient wisdom, where we're talking about karma yoga, where whatever you're doing in life, whether it's wiping your computer, sweeping the floor, that your mind is calm. right?
Mhm.
So I think that it's very challenging for somebody who's struggling with an overactivated nervous system and high stress to be forcing themselves to sit still in meditation. So what else can we do? How can we get to those practices? Because you sitting still is going to stress you even more, because when you're so stressed and you're trying to sit still, at times it can feel as if your mind's not switching off. That's not to say meditation's not good, it's a great practice. But what I mean is, they maybe that person might need a guided meditation, maybe they need to listen to something,
Mhm.
maybe they need to lie on the ground and do yoga nidra. Now why is yoga nidra so powerful is that Vata dosha is air and space, so the person is missing earth. So when you put the whole back surface of the body on the ground and 1 hour you listen to something, the body starts to feel the ground, and that touch of the earth starts to regulate the nervous system. So
Mhm.
these are practices which can help a
Mhm.
lot when somebody is high stress. Now, when we say high stress, again, just to emphasize what we spoke about in the beginning, that what we say high stress in science is what Ayurveda says high vata dosha. So it's the very same thing, that if you put down a list of all the symptoms of high cortisol and high vata, they will be identical. So we're really saying the same thing. So what can we do? So first of all, we can do anything which is contact. So if we do oil massage, if we don't want to do it ourselves, go somewhere once a week, have somebody do an oil massage. Because while research is not perhaps talking about the word abhyanga, there is research to show that oil massage lowers cortisol and boosts oxytocin, which means it helps you regulate the nervous system. What else can we do? That even if you're sitting and watching TV, avoid, one thing I really get a red flag, Kapil, is I've heard friends who I can see their breath is so fast. You can make out they're in a state of fight or flight. And they talk about they love to watch true crime shows. We don't need to bring in images of violence into our brain when we're already struggling with calmness, right? So what do we bring? We can absolutely watch television, because neither is it that all TV is bad. I think when you watch shows which are heartwarming, which make you shed a tear, which make you have a smile at the end, something that those shows can also boost oxytocin. So for example, watching shows like Chesapeake shows, or anything which is very calming, Virgin River, Sweet Magnolia, like things which are happy things that sort of fool our brain into thinking we're also in a similar state. So I think that's really, really important.
So
uh,
everything from what you eat to what you watch to what you do,
Everything
how
we
you are
take
needs
in
to be
from
balanced with.
all our senses,
Right.
right? Whether it's sight, we watch something, what we hear, what we eat, every sense has the potential to, you can either use it to bring in the good things, or it will cause imbalance, which is exactly what my book is about.
Right, right. So going forward, so there is of course this need for people to get this balance in their life, and need for people to regulate the Vat, Pitta, and Kaph in their lives. But along with that, what role do you think technology can play as people are looking at de-addiction, or as people are going through the problem of addiction? And I'm also asking this not just from the perspective of substance use addictions, but also from the perspective of a lot of new age and behavioral addictions, the addiction to gaming, the addiction to gambling, the addiction to phones, the addiction to social media, the addiction to internet. So I'm also asking from those perspectives.
I think that's such a tricky question, Kapil, because one thing the Ayurveda said was that Pitta controls the eyes, but Vata is what is responsible for the movement of the eyes.
Mhm.
Now, today when you see social media, I keep trying to talk about this to raise awareness that you can tell when somebody's Vata imbalanced, because when you watch them moving through Instagram, their fingers scrolling high speed, they're not pausing at any single thing, they're just moving. Now, if you move the eyes so quickly, it's a doorway into the nervous system. So it's going to really upset it. So when I think addiction, shopping, I must talk about shopping addiction because it's very similar to alcohol addiction, sugar addiction, where you can't control going online and shopping, right? That they're all very connected, where all of these have the same roots. They're all vata imbalance. I think it's very, very difficult. I've had this conversation about kids, because with so much of schools being on the screen, and kids are being sucked into this world of addiction, and what are we really setting themselves up? And when we cannot control, are we sitting here working and every few minutes we are opening Instagram and peeking for 10 minutes? How are we going to control that? Now, I know you spoke at the beginning about a platform with a community. I think if something like a community is there where people are struggling with similar challenges, for sure the power of community is profound. Whether it's Ayurveda, which said Satsanga, what the company we keep decides how is our body and mind. Functional medicine talks so much about the power of community, that people in blue zones live longer because of the sense of community.
Mhm.
So I think if it's something where there's a huge, we can't lump all tech into one. For example, watching a program on a tech platform where somebody is walking you through calmness, and you can go back, and every time you feel you're alone, you can go and listen to those videos and feel like you're being reassured, and then there are other people. That's a world of difference to being on Instagram most of the time, where the subliminal messaging is that you're never good enough, because the marketing and business brand gurus are telling everybody to create the hook for their videos in a way where they're putting the other down, where they're telling, there's this subtle messaging that you're not good enough unless you have 100,000 followers. Now, when you hit that 100,000 followers, are you any different? You're the same person. What does it matter?
Well, even when you get to 100,000 followers, you are not good enough till you get to a million. And
Exactly,
the
right? I
cycle
mean,
keeps
it's never going to be the same. And it reminds me of 20, 30 years ago, where, you'd have that one person in your school who everybody knew her father was a millionaire, and everyone wanted to be friends with her. So today, I think sincerity is definitely being questioned, because we are associating all of this with the followers somebody's have. So I think it's a very tricky affair, but tech can be used very appropriately. It's a lot like what I spoke about, the what you intake, whether it's violent true crime shows or something heartwarming. So for sure, if there is things where I know for a fact that there are times even I feel all alone, and nobody might understand, but if I have somebody who's given me a tech into, say, a meditation course or a hypnotherapy, I go back to it and it sort of calms me down. So I think it's
so
about how we decide to use it. But
right.
that decision again is a conscious decision, which goes back to the fact that if somebody has a overactivated amygdala and is in fight or flight, are they going to be able to make that conscious decision that right now it's more important I put my time into meditation versus just being sucked away into that abyss of social media? That is something that only a power of community can help.
Right. And I guess that is where, while of course, I truly appreciate the power of community in that, but I think that is where tech could be a great enabler too. See, specifically in a country like India, where we are always going to be limited by resources, we are going to be limited by practitioners. The power that tech can provide in a self-served kind of a capability that can be trackable, measurable, and kind of, can keep looking at what you are doing, keeps you on track in that sense, helps you with the entire concepts of psychology in a broader sense, helps you create your resilience, helps you build your coping mechanisms, helps you provide and empower you with the right kind of tools, the right kind of capabilities for you to do intervention, gives you that community, and along with community gives you those specific areas, specific forms in which you can express yourself, in which you can gather more knowledge, wisdom, in which you can participate in more meditative aspects, in which you can develop that cup for you. That I think the technology can really empower people in that sense. But at the same time, I mean, there is no hiding from the fact that technology is probably one of the largest drivers of increased addiction. In fact, I very strongly believe that the amount of substance use addiction also increases because our physiological state that we live in is significantly impacted by technology, is significantly impacted by what we view, what is going around us, how our what's our state of dopamine, and its requirements on an ongoing basis will determine how addicted we would become to various aspects of substances as well. So,
and one more thing, Kapil, I think it's very pertinent that we bring that, it's when we say addiction, at times people think it's somebody far away from them. And that's just not it. It's all of us. If we are opening up our social media every half an hour, whenever we have a moment in time, we have patterns of addiction. So I don't think we should look at it as that it's somebody outside of us. We all have the ability to get sucked into it.
yep. Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess in some way, shape, or form, the way we are built as humans, we would always have the tendency to overdo things that, attract us. And at some point of time, in an uncontrolled behavior, that would become addiction. Uh,
Yes.
and it doesn't necessarily need to be bad addiction. Sometimes even things that are good may become addictions. So that's definitely something that needs to be watched out for. One last question that I want to ask you, before we kind of do the funnels. One specific last question that I want to ask you is the role that yoga and Ayurveda can play in helping people reduce their cravings and avoiding relapse. See, for a lot of people, and so when I started this de-addiction journey of putting together the de-addiction platform, one of the things that I used to tell people, specifically people in India, I want to provide people with the capability to de-addict the first time they put their hand on the head of their mother, their wife, or their children, and they say, I'm never going to indulge in it again. And that capability really doesn't exist. And that's what we are trying to create with Pararam Life, the de-addiction program, which is available to people. But even with that, there is always going to be this risk of, cravings and relapses. So from a yoga and Ayurveda perspective, what do you recommend people do to reduce their cravings and to reduce their relapse?
Great. And I think that, yoga also talks a lot about something called samskaras. So does Ayurveda, which basically means you've got certain patterns over lifetimes, which then are very difficult. So you're working literally against everything in you to get over addiction, because whatever you do, that adage, Kapil, that when there's a habit, you take away the H, a bit is left, you take away the A, bit is left, you take away the B, and it's still left. So basically, it means that you've got some patterns inside that it's very difficult to get over. So I think when you practice something repetitive, and I've had this conversation even with a psychologist when it comes to anxiety, that repetitive movements do wonders. So be it doing the same 5 Surya Namaskars every single day. So you're creating sort of a habit, but something that is replacing something else. And then the body and mind start some new neuronal connections, and there is certain formation of patterns which go over these other patterns towards things that might not be beneficial to you. So just doing something which is very repetitive versus going into these platforms where every single day you have a different yoga teacher, different yoga style. Don't do things like that. So if it's yoga, try to do something which is repetitive, similar thing every single day. When it comes to Ayurveda, for sure, what I mentioned right at the beginning is that it makes a world of difference to consider going away and doing a panchakarma every 1 year. It's just 2 weeks of a year, but it's enough to slowly start changing the physiology right from the cellular level. So they're basically softening the tissue deep inside the cell and removing all the toxins. So the person that comes out of a panchakarma, the body and the mind of that person is very different to the person who started it. So I think giving that 2 weeks of your life to panchakarma and adding herbs, but always with the guidance of a qualified practitioner. Why I say this is that ashwagandha is very loosely taken. It can sometime, when somebody's high pitta, the liver is heated from alcohol, ashwagandha may be suggested by somebody saying it's good for stress. It will actually imbalance the body severely. So
Absolutely.
do consult somebody, but then there are safe ones which are practically all right for most people, which I mentioned Jadamansi as a tea, Jadamansi, Shankapushpi. So Shankapushpi is this blue pea flower. So if you take Jadamansi and Shankapushpi and brew just 1 teaspoon of each into a tea and sip, they are both nervines, which means they calm down the nervous system.
Mhm.
And then adding herbs for taking care of the liver, bitter ones, even as simple as triphala. And then taking something like Brahmi, which is again quite safe for most people, but Brahmi will change the way the brain behaves. But I think what's really important beyond the herbs and what I spoke about, Kapil, is what I mentioned about please don't have a low fat diet.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So, one key takeaway is understand your physiology. Second, ensure you are looking at creating that balance in your life. Third, please beware of these online mechanisms or conversations that start, whether it is about taking a zero fat diet, whether it is about doing ashwagandha. All of these, by the way, may be great for people with a certain set of physiology, may be great for people with a certain type of body type, but that may not work for everyone. So one of the things that everybody needs to do is to understand their physiology, understand their vat, pitta, and kapha, and then decide how will they go forward, what would they consume, how would they act, what kind of TV they will watch, what kind of activities they will indulge in, what kind of yoga they would do. And that's really going to be the key to the to kind of creating a balanced life for them. And for those of you who still, while doing all this, end up in a state of addiction and are having challenges with it, I mean, by all means, absolutely go out, look for the Praram Life program. We are there, available to you as a tech-enabled, self-serve, no stigma. Don't need to go converse with others in your life. Don't need to even acknowledge, with society around that you have an addiction. Don't need to go to a treatment center, and it would be able to help you out. Of course, coupled with the power of yoga, coupled with the power of meditation, coupled with the power of Ayurveda, it will create that level of environment where you would be able to get that support in your life. So, Deepa, it's been a fabulous conversation. I hope people hear this conversation and start looking at that balance in their life, start looking at that, call it the customized, personalized capability that they need in their life, not just for the purposes of addiction and de-addiction, but for the purposes of creating that balance in their life as well.
Absolutely well said. And one parting note, Kapil, if I may, is that music is something that's so powerful. Again, it's such a powerful sense organ that, be it whether you like listening to Hindu chants or Christian hymns or whatever religion, doesn't matter, but any of these are known to calm down the nervous system. So whatever calls out to you, whether it's something soothing, just definitely not something jarring and disturbing again, but just make use of it. Even if you're doing something, let it play in the background. These are all great things that we can bring into our life.
In fact, one of the things that we always talk about as soul wellness is the concept of allied therapies. And psychologists like to use the word allied therapies. I actually like to use the word indulgences. I think a lot of mental wellness support comes to people when they indulge, whether that indulgence is in a particular kind of music, in a particular kind of dance, in a particular kind of drawing, painting, artistry, in a particular kind of any activity. I mean, some people get a lot of comfort when they go for a run, or some people get a lot of comfort when they do one specific activity. I get a lot of comfort when I eat good food. Indulgences is an extremely important part for you to gain control at times. Of course, it needs to be very moderated and needs to be looked upon, because indulgence is another word for indulgences, could even be addictions.
Yes.
So, and that's really the power of balance that people need to create. Deepa, it's been fabulous talking to you. A very enlightening session. I'm going to actually take small snippets from this session for people to get value, along with being able to listen to the entire session. Thank you so much for coming on Truth Shots with Kapil, the de-addiction series. And thank you everyone for tuning in, for listening to this. I hope you got value. Please come back, ask your questions, and we will come back to you next time with another, speaker, somebody who is going to talk about some specific other aspect of de-addiction. Thank you so much, Deepa, and thank you so much, everyone else.